evening, everyone, and welcome to our Pulse Remembrance Vigil. I want to thank you all for joining us here tonight as we gather to remember and grieve the 49 people who were killed at Pulse nightclub 5 years ago. My name is Ava Devine. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm a student and member of Lavender Council here at UCF. 6 months ago, my mother died from cancer, and for the first time in my life, I experienced personal grief. I say personal grief and not just grief because as a queer person, I've been in a growing state of mourning since birth. As a member of a community that is built upon trauma, I can't accurately say that this feeling is new to me. I can't accurately say that I haven't been here before. In the wake of my mom's death, I frequently feel like I'm examining my grief from the outside. If I do that, if I hold it far from me but still within sight, it's not so scary to look at. This way, I can turn my grief around in my hands and examine it from all angles. I can make it seem smaller. But what I failed to realize in the first few months of my mourning is how sticky grief is. You can hold it but not let go, especially if you're constantly pushing it to the tips of your fingers like I was. Eventually, you can no longer pretend it's not there. So gradually, over these last couple of months, I've begun to pull my grief in closer. And I wanted to understand this thing that had made a home on my body. I wanted to know why it wouldn't leave. And as I poked at my grief, I found myself revisiting places I had been before. As I sought to understand more, I looked in at myself in mourning, and I saw a person of 15 looking out. On the day of the massacre at Pulse nightclub, I was 15 years old and 2 years out of the closet. The queer world that I thought I knew at 15 was one of San Francisco pride and rainbow t-shirts. My coming out was simple. I had the support of my family and most of my friends, and the strife I knew to exist within the community was easy to keep at arm's length, because before Pulse, I'd never seen it from the inside. At 15, I saw my grief over Pulse as a finite and distant thing. There was a beginning, June 12th, 2016, so surely there had to be an end. I didn't personally know anyone who was killed, so surely the pain I felt for my community wouldn't be constant. I told myself I was not close enough to this tragedy to warrant the pain I felt. But I couldn't understand why then it didn't seem to lessen. I couldn't understand why in visiting UCF for the first time 2 years ago, a heavy weight rolled over in my stomach as I stood before the Pulse Memorial on campus. I couldn't understand why in writing this speech I felt rage, a deep aggravated anger over a wound that is now 5 years old. As a part of a community that's constantly under public scrutiny and physical attack, it's impossible to separate ourselves from each other. It's impossible to consider the brutality against members of the LGBTQ+ community as something impersonal. Like that grief, the pain of our community can't remain on the tips of our fingers for long. So how do we progress away from grief if it's attached to us? How do we process a pain that after 5 years has not healed over? The simplest answer is that we do not move away, but instead we move through. There's a reason that after the Stonewall riots, after the AIDS epidemic, after the murder of 49 innocent lives, we as a community continue to gather and advocate for our rights. We show up despite being exhausted, furious, and broken, because if we don't speak for our community, nobody will. If I don't live long enough to tell the next generation about my mother, who will? If we don't use our anger and devastation and grief to carry us back to the streets, the voting booths, and the forefront of social change, then we risk doing a disservice to those who no longer have the choice. I'm still looking for clarity in my grief. I'm not sure if that clarity is something that really exists. The violence that brought us all here today is devastating, but in our grief, we're reminded of the continuous unity that we share in the face of hate. We're reminded of those who fought for our rights, who died refusing to be anything but themselves, and who loved each other endlessly. And I feel that if the span of that love is as infinite as the grief we must bear, then it cannot be a waste to feel this pain. Thank you. I would like to now welcome our next speaker, the president of UCF himself, President Alexander Cartwright.
Thank you, Ava. And thank you to everybody for being here this evening. I'd like to specifically thank UCF's Offices of Social Justice and Advocacy and LGBTQ plus services for organizing this amazing tribute to the 49 lives that were lost, taken 5 years ago this week. Thank you to all of today's speakers, both from UCF and in the community, such as Representative Carlos Guillermo Smith and Josh Bell from the One Orlando Alliance. The Pulse nightclub shooting is such an unforgettable tragedy. I learned more about it from the news from afar, and the thing that stuck out to me was that it, in the end, brought so many people together, an outpouring of support from around the world for the victims, the survivors, their families and friends, and of course the LGBTQ plus community. Even during such a dark time, it was heartwarming to see images of lines of community members waiting to donate blood, hear of the local businesses donating food, water, airplane tickets, and more to lift those in need. I'm so proud of the way that our university responded, including the UCF Police Department, Victim Services, LGBTQ plus services, Social Justice and Advocacy, and Counseling and Psychological Services responded and helped, and how so many offices and divisions were present and supporting Orlando and our campus community, including how UCF paid tribute to the 2 nights lost, alumnus Drew Leinonen and student Juan Ramon Guerrero. When I first had an opportunity to tour UCF, one of the first things that I saw was a tribute. And I will tell you, it was that day that I felt very proud to have been selected as president of this university. It is remarkable that we are at a place where we can continue to strive for the inclusive excellence and being the model for the country and the world, a model that will continue to be an example of a welcoming community that all universities should strive to be, and that society should strive to be. Inclusivity is the right thing to do, and the smart thing to do. We are so much more powerful together. If we are to become the best version of UCF that we can be, everyone must feel welcome, included, supported, and celebrated on all of our campuses every day. After this past year, it is even more important that we come together, support one another, and allow our compassion and love for each other to help us create a better future for all of us. If we all lead with love, hate can never win. Thank you so much for being here tonight to honor the victims and show your support. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Josh Bell. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm the executive director of One Orlando Alliance. I never went to Pulse when it was open, not because I was 15, like some people. I was in my early 30s when the tragedy happened, but I wasn't open. I was in a space where I could not accept myself, and I didn't know that it was okay to be myself as a gay man. The morning that we started hearing the reports of Pulse, it had already been an awful, awful weekend in Orlando. Christina Grimmie had been shot, and little Lane Graves at Disney had lost his life. So that morning, I was preparing to do what I did every Sunday, which is stand up and preach, because I was a pastor. And I was figuring out how to communicate to my congregation how we move through grief and pain and senseless tragedy. And then Pulse happened. And the senseless tragedy was so much deeper and so much harder. And it really just defied our descriptive abilities in terms of what do we even call this? Every word falls short. But what I saw, almost from the very first moment, was people showing up in love to hold on to the wounded, to grab hold of people who were sobbing their eyes out, who had been crushed by loss. I saw what love looks like in moments like that. And it taught me something. It taught me that as a community, we are more than worthy of love, just as we are. That there are people who will love us for who we are. And that love shows us that we are worthy, that we are whole, that we are beautiful. And so even though I never went to Pulse, Pulse changed my life. From that first day to the first remembrance, to the second remembrance, to the third remembrance. And now as we come upon this fifth remembrance, my life has changed radically. I am now what I call professionally gay. It's a very weird feeling. But what it really taught me was this is a place where we can be ourselves. This is a place where we can step into all that we are in this community. Our community is not perfect. We have plenty of room to grow. We have plenty of room to learn. But this is a beautiful place where you get to be yourself and I get to be myself. And that to me is the legacy of Pulse. It's not the pain and the awful, awful reality, though those are real and we can't cover them up. The legacy of Pulse is what came in the aftermath, and that's love. And so I appreciate this opportunity that we have to mark this date. I appreciate the opportunity that we have to be together. And I hope that what you feel tonight, even in the midst of so much grief, is a deep and abiding love, just as you are. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. My name is Valentina Diaz. My pronouns are she, they, and I was recently awarded the One Pulse Legacy Scholarship in memory of Mercedes Marisol Flores. And I will be reading the 49 names today. Stanley Almodovar III, 23. Amanda Alvear, 25. Oscar A. Arcena Montero, 26. Rodolfo Ayala Ayala, 33. Alejandro Barrios Martínez, 21. Martín Benítez Torres, 33. Antonio D. Brown, 30. Daryl R. Burt II, 29. Jonathan A. Camuy Vega, 24. Ángel L. Candelario Padro, 28. Simon A. Carrillo Fernández, 31. Juan Chévez Martínez, 25. Luis D. Conde, 39. Corey J. Connell, 21. Tevin Eugene Crosby, 25. Frankie J. De Jesus Velasquez, 50. Dianca D. Drayton, 32. Mercedes Marisol Flores, 26. Peter O. Gonzalez Cruz, 22. Juan R. Guerrero, 22. Paul T. Henry, 41. Frank Hernandez, 27. Miguel A. Honorato, 30. Javier Jorge Reyes, 40. Jason B. Josephat, 19. Eddie J. Justice, 30. Anthony Luis Laureano Disla, 25. Christopher A. Leinanen, 32. Brenda L. Marquez McCool, 49. Jean C. Menendez Perez, 35. Akira Monet Murray, 18. Kimberly Morris, 37. Giancarlos Nieves Rodriguez, 27. Luis Ocasio Capo, 20. Geraldo A. Ortiz Jimenez, 25. Eric Ivan Ortiz Rivera, 36. Joel Rayon Panagua, 32. Enrique L. Rios, Jr., 25. Juan Pablo Rivera Velázquez, 37. Gilmari Rodríguez Solivan, 24. Christopher Joseph Sanfeliz, 24. Xavier Emmanuel Serrano Rosado, 35. Gilberto Ramón Silva Menéndez, 25. Edward Sotomayor, Jr., 34. Shane E. Tomlinson, 33. Leroy Valentín Fernández, 25. Luis S. Bielma, 22. Luis Daniel Wilson León, 37. Gerard Arthur Wright, 31. Thank you very much.
Good evening. My name is Angela Warnsize. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I am the president-elect of the UCF Pride Faculty and Staff Association. On June 12, 2016, a horrendous event occurred at Pulse nightclub, and that took the lives of 49 people. Tonight, we gather to recognize and honor them and all the victims of that event, the survivors, the first responders, the friends and family, and the Orlando and UCF communities. That evening, which was meant to break us, instead taught us to come together on a massive scale to support and encourage one another. We saw unprecedented levels of individual and interagency collaboration, the birth of new agencies. Literal angels lined the streets to block out hate, and we showed the world just how strong the Orlando and UCF communities are. Since its inception, PFSA has worked with various partners to help provide students, staff, and faculty with a sense of community and belonging at UCF. After the incident at Pulse, this became even more important. Knight Nation came together to grieve and to heal. We saw a jump in membership as allies stepped forward to show their support. We continued working with LGBTQ+ services to ensure that students who applied for the Alliance Mentorship Program had mentors, even if that sometimes meant we had 2 or 3 mentees in order to meet the demands, because those relationships enriched our lives just as much as it enriched the lives of our students. In the last 5 years, we've helped provide initial funding for scholarships for LGBTQ+ students. We've provided educational outreach to help people outside of the LGBTQ+ community build a basic understanding of terms and issues that affect our community, and provided a space to ask questions that are normally too taboo. We've provided social opportunities to bring our members together and strengthen our bonds. Our members have served in a variety of committees, both on campus and Orlando-wide, to ensure these diverse points of view are considered and included. Going forward, PFSA plans to help our UCF family adjust to returning to campus by continuing our previous activities, but offering a mix of in-person and virtual events. This will allow greater participation for people on our satellite campuses, and we look forward to scheduling some group community outreach, because we recognize that Knight Nation is part of the Orlando community. But most importantly, we're here to support the community however we are needed. We invite people and organizations to reach out to us and let us know how we can work together to create a safe and inclusive community for all. I'd like to share a quote by Warren Zevon. They say love conquers all. You can't start it like a car, and you can't stop it with a gun. We did not, and we will not, let the hate win. We're Orlando strong and UCF strong. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Adrienne Frame, and I'm the Interim Vice President for Student Development and Enrollment Services. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. On June 12, 2016, I was actually at home in Boston. I had lived here most of my adult life in Florida, and we had moved back to my actual birth home to be with my parents during my mother's illness. And so I can remember vividly that morning, although it was quite ordinary. I really think that Pulse is one of those moments that you probably remember exactly where you were when you heard about it, or saw it, or learned. On June 12th, I was sitting in my very ordinary house with my very ordinary cup of coffee, watching my very ordinary morning television show. I started to see pictures of this unbelievably horrific sight in a city that I knew I had lots of friends in, and actually knew that one of my very favorite former students was in that very night with his partner going out, because I had heard from him the night before, Frame, we're so excited. We're going to have a great evening. In preparation for this talk today, I went back and looked at those text messages from that morning. I didn't know where he was, and finally I got a text. And I read through that text exchange, and it is such an awesome set of messages of honesty, of authenticity, of love, and of joy, complete joy. And I reflect today on how many text messages and phone calls that day went unanswered. When we first moved to Orlando in January of 2017, Pulse was actually one of the first places that my family went together. My children at the time were 13 and 12, and I always tell people who are new to our community, if you want to understand UCF, if you want to understand Orlando, go to Pulse. Spend some time, like real time. Read every panel. Read every item left there by whoever was left by. Learn the stories of the 49, many of them members of Black and Brownies, as well as the LGBTQ plus community. I see where the walls were breached by law enforcement officers heroically working to save as many lives as they could that very evening. It's a truly moving place. It is truly hallowed ground, and I encourage any of you who have not been there before to make a time to go. Learning about the 49, remembering the loss of that day, including UCF's very own Drew Leinenen and Juan Guerrero, who appear seated in the mural out front, which again, I hope you will go and see once we're done here today. Pulse deeply impacted me and deeply impacted the Orlando and the UCF community. When I arrived here in January of 2017, I remember hearing the stories, the way this community came together, the way that our faculty and staff and students supported one another, the heroic acts of people like Victim Services who worked immediately to help victims' families in the Family Reunification Center, to help people find each other, to find out what happened to their loved ones. CAPS, Care Services, Social Justice and Advocacy, UCF Police Department. LGBTQ Services, and UCF Restores, who work with so many law enforcement officers who experienced PTSD as a result of their response that day. The first vigil here at UCF is an amazing story. It actually rained that night, and so people had a plan to be outside, but instead it happened here in the rotunda. And if you haven't seen those pictures, I hope you will find one. Google it. There were 1,000 people in each line of that rotunda on each of the areas. You can see it. Such an amazing outpouring of love and support, exactly who we are at UCF. In so many spaces and among so many people, I've heard Pulse described as a place of comfort and safety, a place of home and family, and a place where members of the LGBTQ community could come together and be unapologetically their true and authentic selves. This is exactly what we endeavored to be in the days and months and weeks that followed Pulse, and what we continue to strive to be here at UCF each and every day. To be a place where everyone feels included and able to share their authentic selves and be celebrated for the unique talents, skills, joys, challenges, triumphs, and humanity that they bring to our UCF family and our community. On June 12th, a community of people went to a place called Pulse to be together, to celebrate, to express joy, and to dance. May Pulse remind us that tomorrow is not promised to any of us, and that we need to do all we can today to impact and improve our world for one another. Homophobia has no place here. Transphobia has no place here. Hate has no place here. Unity is who we are at UCF, and unity is what we do. Today, as we gather together 5 years later to remember the 49, we do so as a community of care and support for all, with open hearts and our authentic selves, showing that without fail, love wins. Love always wins.
Good evening. My name is Carlos Guillermo Smith. I'm a state representative in the Florida House of Representatives, representing the UCF area in the Florida House. My pronouns are he, him, él. Something Ava said earlier actually hit me, which was that she felt when she was out of Orlando, when Pulse happened, when they were out of Orlando, that they felt they didn't have the right to feel pain and grief. It's not true. It's not true. Because Pulse was an attack on all of us, on nuestra comunidad hispana, on LGBTQ people. And that hurts. It doesn't matter if you knew someone at Pulse or not. It hurts. 5 years ago, UCF invited me actually to speak at the first Pulse Remembrance Vigil just 2 days after the attack. Knights were in a state of shock. But you gave blood. You donated money to victims and families. You did what you could to help, even though you were heartbroken. Hundreds of students and faculty filled the many levels of the rotunda in the student union, like Dr. Frame was saying. And the reason people were grieving, whether they knew someone or not, is because you all have a pulse. I remember some of the things that I said at the first UCF Pulse Vigil. Full disclosure, I gave a pretty angry speech condemning homophobia, condemning transphobia, condemning Islamophobia, and demanding action from our elected leaders, and calling out those who were in the pockets of the NRA who were unwilling to protect us from gun violence that was and is destroying everything we hold dear. Looking back, I don't regret any of it. We lost 2 nights at Pulse nightclub. Juan Ramon Guerrero, a UCF pre-finance major, and his loving partner, Drew Leinanen, a 2-time knight with a bachelor's in psychology, class of 2007, and then a master's in psychology, class of 2009. They left behind beautiful families who I've gotten to know, and friends who love them so much and who fight every single day to honor them with action. The mural's outside. It's the 2 of them, Juan and Drew, with all the birds. A beautiful mural commemorating not how they died, but how they lived. 5 years ago, we really couldn't make sense of any of it. Angela told us before that we saw the angels with the big wings, the big white wings to block out hate. And it occurred to me when I walked into the room tonight that because the tragedy was 5 years ago, most of you weren't students at UCF. And that some of the stories that we've heard, some of the experiences that we've seen, are ones that you don't know. Angela told us about the angels with white wings, and I feel like you should know that story. the human chain link. It was a Facebook group that was formed after the tragedy at Pulse, when our community found out that the Westboro Baptist Church was coming to Orlando to picket the funerals of the 49. You know the Westboro Baptist Church. The individuals who have picketed the funerals of service members to protest gays serving in the military with signs that say, "God hates fags." And the White Angels came together. Everyone came together in the Human Chain Link Facebook group as a community to say, we're going to stand outside of the doors of the churches and spaces where these funerals are happening with these huge white angel wings that are intentionally tall, intentionally wide, not transparent, so that when the families walk out of the funerals, they won't see the Westboro Baptist Church. I remember this. When I left Drew's funeral, I remember walking out the steps of the church, and I saw those angel wings all connected, a human chain link, and signs that said, "Love wins." That's Orlando United. I didn't plan to tell you that story, but I was inspired by what Angela told us. So 5 years ago, we could not make sense of how one hateful person with a Sig Sauer MCX, a new age AR-15, could kill 49 people in a matter of minutes. We can't make sense of it now either. But 5 years later, we can and we should reflect on the progress that we've made since the shooting and understand that progress might look a little different than we thought. That maybe for every 2 steps forward, we also take a step backwards. Have we made progress on gun violence prevention? Yes. After Parkland, Florida raised the minimum age to buy a gun from 18 to 21. We created a red flag law to allow a court to intervene and take someone's gun if they are a threat to themselves or someone else. 2 steps forward. Florida also created a law that arms teachers in our public schools. A step backwards. Have we made progress on LGBTQ equality? Yes. After Pulse, we saw even more love and more acceptance for LGBTQ people. And it wasn't just the rainbows. You could tell something changed within us as a community here in Central Florida. But after his election, former President Trump banned transgender Americans from serving in the military and rolled back a number of protections for LGBTQ people, steps forward and then backwards. And then last summer, the Supreme Court of the United States affirmed that yes, LGBTQ people are protected under the Civil Rights Act from discrimination in employment. And in January, President Biden signed a sweeping executive order reinstating many of those LGBTQ anti-discrimination protections that were rolled back. And weeks later, he reversed the ban on transgender Americans serving in the military. Huge steps forward. It's progress. But of course, recently, our governor signed a bill to ban trans students from being able to play on team sports, and he vetoed critical funding for Pulse survivors and LGBTQ homeless youth. Those were, and they are, major steps backwards. But we've seen this movie before. Whenever we see tremendous progress, just remember, there's going to be backlash. And the backlash stings, and it hurts. But the only way to ensure that the pendulum swings back towards equality is to tell our stories, be our authentic selves, and fight like hell. And let me make something else very clear, which is that gun violence prevention is an LGBTQ issue. From the Pulse shooting to LGBTQ youth suicide where firearms are used, to the rising gun violence against Black transgender women across the country, the LGBTQ community has suffered terribly as a result of laxed gun laws. That's why gun violence prevention is an LGBTQ rights issue. And that's also the case for other marginalized communities who've been targets of hate violence. We see rising anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, attacks against Asian Americans, all on the rise. It has to stop. How? We have to require mandatory reporting of hate crimes from all law enforcement agencies to fully understand the problem. Florida does not require reporting of hate crimes to the federal government. We must continue to promote understanding, acceptance, and love for LGBTQ people and all marginalized communities. We must limit access to assault weapons and large capacity magazines and pass the assault weapons ban bill that I have introduced every single year in the Florida House for the past 5 years. And we got to remember the lives of those 49 angels, of our 2 eternal knights, Juan and Drew. 5 years later, I think it's incumbent upon all of us to recommit to honoring them all with these actions so that tragedies like this stop happening. That's why I always wear the ribbon, the Pulse ribbon on my jacket, to remind me of that commitment I made in 2016, to honor them with action, to honor the 49. And a lot of times when I'm down, when I'm searching for hope, I can look at the ribbon and I remember not only that commitment and the 49 angels, but I remember what's really important and what's worth fighting for. And that's life, love, and equality for all. And so, charge on. Charge on, Juan and Drew, and the other 47 angels who were taken June 12th, 2016.
Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. Good evening again. We are here to celebrate and honor 49 beautiful angels. Yes, we have our 2 eternal nights, as Carlos just called out, but we're also here to celebrate and honor their lives because they mattered. They absolutely mattered. And so I can't see her right now, Ava, but you know I love you. But you really brought something to my memory that we have been doing the vigil in remembrance of the Pulse nightclub shooting. We've been doing UCF Remembers now for 5 years. But we don't talk about why we do UCF Remembers. We don't talk about why we held the first vigil. For those, I think it was Adrian who talked about, you know, when you got news of the shooting, you knew where you were. You remember exactly where you were. I remember exactly what I was doing when I received a text message from a group of students that said, at WANA, we need to do something. We want to do something. I was actually on a call with our former vice president, Dr. Ehas. And so as everyone is chattering and stuff, and they're asking me questions, and I got silent, and all of a sudden I keep hearing, at WANA, are you here? And I'm like reading the text message, and I'm like, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? And they said, we want to do a vigil. I said, all right, we're doing the vigil. And so, Michael, can you come up here, please? And so Michael, at the time, was an undergraduate student. And he was a part of the group of students who said, we need to do something. And so they said, we're doing a vigil. And I remember telling the group on the phone, I was like, the students want to do a vigil. And they're like, well, how can we do this? What do we do? I was like, I don't know, but we're doing a vigil. And they're like, when are we doing it? I was like, in 2 days, we're going to make this happen. And they're like, how are we going to make this happen? I said, I don't know, but we're going to make it happen because the students wanted to do it. And yes, we lost 2 of our own. But the students were very adamant that we will honor the 49 who lost their lives. And so I remember having meetings, and Michael loves the story because I stood outside the door of a meeting before we went in with other administrators, and I said, look, whatever y'all want to happen is going to happen. You just, if somebody says something, you look at me, give me a look, and I'll intervene. And so the vigil that they talked about that happened in 2016, that was supposed to be outside, but it happened perfectly right here in this building. And it was the most beautiful thing ever. And it happened here for a reason. It wasn't meant to be outside. And so, Michael, I want to thank you for your commitment every year for the past 5 years to make sure this vigil happens. The attention to detail that Michael pays to this vigil, because it's important, because the 49 mattered. When you see these vases, you see these roses, they represent lives that are no longer here. But we are here to celebrate them, to honor them. And so, Michael, thank you from day one telling me we need to make a vigil happen. And thank you to this day for making sure we have a vigil every single year, because he has been present every single year. Thank you. if the Pulse nightclub shooting taught us a lot, it taught us love wins. It taught us that hate doesn't have a place here in Orlando. But it also taught us, especially this year in the pandemic, that you have got to give people their flowers, their accolades while they're here, because everyone matters. And so I know I interrupted the schedule. I wasn't on program, but I just took the liberty. I took the liberty to share that story and to give Michael his flowers, because you have been here since the beginning. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Christopher Nault. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I'm a licensed mental health counselor at Counseling and Psychological Services, also known as CAPS, here at UCF. Thank you for inviting me to speak at this important milestone event this evening. I first learned of the Pulse Massacre when I awoke that Sunday morning to repeated texts and notifications. Upon checking them, I immediately turned on the local TV news, and as I learned more of the details, time just began to blur. It seemed like only minutes had passed, but it was actually 3 hours later when I finally lifted my tear-stained self up from the couch and decided to start getting ready for church. Like many of us, I was feeling a strong need for support and fellowship that morning, and the service, as you can expect, was intensely emotional. Outside of my responsibilities here at UCF, I volunteer with an organization called Orlando Youth Alliance, which provides a safe space for LGBTQ youth to be their authentic selves in a conversational setting with the support of adult mentors. The group ranges in age from 13 to 23. And some of the older youth frequently visited Pulse. So, myself and the other volunteers in the organization had a few frantic hours of trying to contact all of the youth to make sure that they were okay. We eventually heard from all of them, and were actually shocked to discover that one of them had been at Pulse that night, but had left merely 30 minutes prior to the shooting. As you can imagine, our gratitude for their safety was tempered by the reality that was slowly sinking in that day. One of my CAPS colleagues asked that I share this following story with you. They write, "After the Pulse Massacre, I served as a traveling therapist. There was a concern that the majority of people affected would not make it into therapy. As a liaison from a former place of employment, I went to the Savoy nightclub to reach out, connect, and talk about how people were affected, as having a therapist on site offered people an opportunity to share their impressions, thoughts, and feelings. I didn't know how much a listening ear would be needed, and didn't know if people would feel safe enough to share vulnerable feelings publicly or with a stranger. As it turns out, it was like I tapped into a wellspring. There was much to share and a lot of tears. As you might imagine, the shares were about longing and missing, feeling targeted and fears of ostracization, sadness for the families, concerns about shaming from the broader community, fears of a repeat experience, and many more emotional experiences. A few months later, she continues to write, I bumped into one of the women I spoke with. We were both waiting in line at Starbucks, and she was already tearing up when she asked me, are you that girl? Are you that counselor who talked to us? When it looked like she couldn't hold it in anymore, she burst into tears, happy for someone caring, stating that it helped a lot for she and her friends to express their feelings and that she was so grateful that people showed their concern. We hugged and teared up together, and I offered to have a sit and talk it out, but she needed to get on with her day. She said she just wanted to say that talking helped her a lot. Experiences like this were shared frequently over the coming days and weeks as we, as a community, individually and in our small circles, tried to process and begin to heal from what was, at the time, the worst mass shooting in modern U.S. history. I recall feeling so proud of my community and beyond, including here at UCF, for the outpouring of support. As has already been mentioned by the other speakers tonight, the people who gave blood, those who offered services and made donations, vigils held on campus and downtown, the Orlando United campaign, and of course, the specially painted UCF PD patrol car always stands out in my mind. The murals that were painted at UCF and throughout Orlando served and still serve as reminders of our resiliency and hope, and that love wins. Accessing that resiliency and hope, however, is not always easy. And for that, there are resources that can help. Here on campus, students have access to CAPS, the psychology clinic, victim services, student care services, and the Community Counseling and Research Center. In the greater Orlando community, organizations such as the Center, Orlando Youth Alliance, Q Latinx, One Orlando Alliance, Zebra Coalition, and the Mental Health Association of Central Florida, and many others, offer resources and/or support to those in need. Regarding CAPS, our services are available to all students enrolled at UCF, as well as Valencia downtown, and include individual, group, and couple counseling, along with dozens of workshops and outreach events every semester. Our services can be accessed through our website, by calling CAPS, or by walking into our building, which is located next to Student Health Services here on the main campus, and we are also in the Union West building downtown. We also offer self-help resources through the TOW link on our website, which is on our homepage, as well as after-hours crisis counseling via our phone number, which is 407-823-2811. And if you haven't seen our beautiful butterfly board just outside these doors, please stop by on your way out to take a look and to write a message of remembrance or hope on one of the butterflies. This board with all its butterflies will be on display in the CAPS building. Even though 5 years have passed, for many people, the grieving process and healing are ongoing. Please remember that we are each unique individuals who process information in ways that may differ from those of others. So there's no right or wrong way to experience the pain of loss. From the more obvious loss via separation from someone we love, to the more intangible types of loss, such as a sense of loss of safety or innocence. We each follow our own timeline, and it's important to remember when showing compassion to others to also show compassion to ourselves. It also helps to remember that along with the darkness of pain, there is also the light of healing love. And if you ever need help finding that light, please remember that your community is here to support you. Thank you, and charge on.
Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Nooms. I'm the Student Life Coordinator for LGBTQ+ services here at UCF, and my pronouns are he, him, and his. I want to thank you all once again for attending this vigil, for sitting here with us all, and remembering the 49 today and every day. We live because they cannot. We go on because they cannot. and it is with all of your actions and all of your love that we move forward. Thank you all again, and go Knights, and charge on.